How do you connect with anyone in less than 60 seconds? This used to be my job. I used to do this for a living. A bunch of strangers would walk into a room and I needed to build a relationship of trust in less than a minute or two. And so in this video, I'm gonna share the tools that allowed me to do that in 500 plus conversations with tens of thousands of strangers. It's not lost on me, the irony that this video is longer than 60 seconds. I didn't promise that I could teach you how to do this in less than 60 seconds. I'm Chad Littlefield. Can't wait to get started. Let's go. So in the video, I'm gonna share 3 particular steps that you can follow. 1, 2, 3, they're very easy to remember. And every time you meet up with somebody, whether you know them really well or you're re-getting to know them because you haven't seen them in a year and a half, or it's a complete stranger, these 3 steps you can follow. I'm gonna teach you them though through 3 stories. These 3 stories will help these 3 steps really stick in your brain so that they're accessible the next time you bump into somebody new or somebody old. The first one, my partner in crime, Will Wise, told me this, and it was an experience that he had. He was leading a group, and the first idea that we share with people is to notice. Notice what is around you in your current context, in your current space. This is kind of the awkward elevator tool, right? When there's no other context, you only have these 4 little walls, the poster that's on the side, what you're wearing, what they're wearing, and that's just about it, right? So even in that context, first step is to notice. And oftentimes we'll actually teach people to pay attention to or notice what someone is wearing, carrying, sharing, or presenting. And so somebody walks into the room and Will looks up and he's got a Yankees hat on. And Will's like, I'm not really curious about that. Next. Goes down, got a Yankees jacket on. He's like, okay, strike number 2. Under the Yankees jacket is a Yankees jersey. Looks down even further. He's got Yankees pants on. He goes to sit down, revealing just a little bit of, I don't know about the Yankees underwear, but probably at this rate, because he looked down and his shoes had a Yankee emblem on it. And he sat down, his pants went up, and he had Yankees socks. Will is not a sports person, neither am I. No natural curiosity about that. But tip number 1 is to notice what's in your environment, and tip number 2, or step number 2, is to wonder, to be naturally, genuinely curious. And so Will wasn't curious about sports, but he was curious how this dude became such a fanatic of the Yankees. And so I wasn't there, I don't know exactly how he asked this question, but something along the lines of, hey, I just have to ask, like, how did you become such a fanatic or a fan of the Yankees? Fanatic is probably a little intense, so fan might, anyway. This guy unloaded with the story of how really the only or the main times that he connected with his dad was when he was at Yankees games, right? So he revealed this very personal thing that was real for him. And the key here is, and the value of that notice tool is, he knew he was gonna be in public that day. So he chose to communicate something to the world before we ever bumped into him. And so that makes it a pretty psychologically, emotionally safe thing to ask about, right? Is there risk in asking somebody about something that you're noticing in the environment? Sure, there's risk in all social engagement interaction, but less so when you know somebody chose to put something on, right? If you ask them about the size of his nose, you don't really have a choice over that. So even though you've noticed it, I might steer clear of things that people cannot change about who they are. The second idea of wondering didn't become apparent to me until I sat down with my grandmother, who's since passed, and I had known her for 20 years before this moment that I sat on a couch down next to her. Yet this time was different because I had just spent some time with Will really working on this natural curiosity, this wondering thing. And so, I learned to reframe curiosity for me as a switch, right? You can turn it on or you can turn it off. For most of us, as we get taller and bigger, at some point, either we ourselves or somebody turns off the switch. I think it's probably a group effort, right? School says get the right answer, don't be necessarily curious, perhaps, but I don't think we can just blame school, because as humans, as we accumulate more knowledge, we tend to slide more into a mindset of knowing, and we get further and further away of this mindset of learning. So anyway, sat down next to Grandma, and I just said, switch on. What am I naturally, genuinely curious about? And what showed up for me in that moment was recognizing that I noticed that she had been alive for several more United States presidents than I had been alive for. And so I just asked, hey, I'm really curious, Grandma, like, who was one of your favorite presidents? And she told me all about the story about somebody who I thought was like dead in the 1700s or something in my amateur 20-year-old brain. But it created this really cool conversation rooted purely in my natural curiosity. And so step number 2 is wonder. Again, we're still under 60 seconds here, right? Notice real quick, I noticed my grandmother was a lot older than I was. I was curious about what she experienced before I was born. I was curious specifically about the presidents, and so I threw that out, and that started a conversation. That first notice, that first wonder, the point is not to talk about US presidents for an hour and a half. The point is to open up several other things. When Will asked Yankee Man about how he became such a fan, they kind of stopped talking about the Yankees and started talking about his dad, right? So very quickly that curiosity, that noticing and that wondering leads into conversations about who people are rather than that intro topic that you just threw out for the first time. And number 3, inquire. In our book, me and Will's book, Ask Powerful Questions, Create Conversations That Matter, we talk about asking questions specifically that begin with how or what and not why. And the reason for that is why is a very scientific question. When I ask you, if I ask my grandma, why was this your favorite president, what she needs to do in that moment is rationalize and justify why that was her favorite president. Whereas if I ask, what is one of your favorite things about that president? Or what is something I wish I could say he or she did, but what is one of the things that he did that really stuck out to you, etc., right? Following that natural curiosity with a what or how question rather than a why allows us to open up. The important thing to know here at step number 3 about inquiring is to scaffold your questions, or just to remember that you can scaffold your questions. I have a friend and colleague, a wonderful speaker, coach, and facilitator named Shane Hatton in Australia. And he used one of our We Connect cards at one point. It's one of the more light questions. It was, what is one of the strangest foods you've ever tried? And I almost took the question out of the deck because I was like, I don't know if that really helps people connect. Let's get something else in there. But once he told me this, I was like, ooh, this needs to stay in the deck, because he asked this question to a group of senior leaders that I never would have asked this question to, but he scaffolded that question by right after asking, and how is trying a new food, like or not like being a great leader? Whoa, he took this question here that was very entry level, easy to answer, and then took it very naturally, segued it to something very meaningful, on topic, on purpose, etc. And so remembering that in the first 60 seconds, you can ask the lighter question. You do not need to ask somebody what is life teaching them at a bus stop within 60 seconds. Based on what you notice, you can find a doorway that's a little bit easier to enter a conversation through. I believe information should be free, and design experiences for some of the coolest leaders and educators and organizations on the planet is how I make a living, how We and Me thrives. If you want a free excerpt of Ask Powerful Questions, there is a link in the description. I'm Chad Littlefield. Have an awesome day.